Facebook's saying just today it's going to start disclosing more about political ads, and that would bring its disclosures more in line with those of television's. Television's disclosures, that is. From what you have heard from members of Congress, is this enough to satisfy them?
Absolutely not. Earlier this week at a Bloomberg Next event, I interviewed Senator Amy Klobuchar, a bipartisan co-author of legislation also put forth by Senators John McCain and Lindsey Graham, two prominent Republicans, obviously. And what they would do is essentially make the disclosures much more public and in line with what print advertising has to do, with what radio advertising has to do, with what television advertising has to do. You know, what the senator told me was essentially, you wouldn't be driving down the interstate in Iowa ahead of the Iowa caucus and not looking at a billboard with an ad put forth by Vladimir Putin. Look, at Bloomberg, we cover unanimously across the board anytime there is a major failure of a financial institution and they send their CEOs to testify on Capitol Hill. The fact that Mark Zuckerberg or a Sheryl Sandberg is not testifying next week has drawn intense scrutiny from both Democrats and Republicans.
Megan, let me ask you what this signals about the relationship between Washington and Silicon Valley. It's been uneasy at times. There's still some foreignness. There's a huge geographic gap. It seems like it's wider still between these two places. What are next week's hearings going to do to that relationship? Is it a problem here, as you see it, that we're not seeing the heads of these companies come to Washington?
So let's just split it down into two groups. There's the immediate, the galvanizing force behind this, which is potential Russian interference with the election and what social platforms they might have used to achieve that. So that's pot A. Pot B is actually the much greater issue for these companies, and that is as they edge closer to being labeled and being considered as a content distribution, the equivalent of a media company with the same rights and responsibilities, not only in terms of advertising, in terms of transparency, in terms of distribution, the same rules that other platforms across the media distribution mechanism would have to play. That is really the bête noire for them. That is really the alarming thing. They will make tweaks. They will try and deal with the Russian situation in terms of how they were used. They've announced some changes, but it's really that is the holy grail for many increasing number of lawmakers, is really penetrating much more deeply into their distribution mechanism. It is interesting that you don't see a Sheryl Sandberg and a Mark Zuckerberg. In fact, we've seen very little of Sheryl Sandberg writ large since this scandal broke. But here's the thing I think that cannot be underestimated. They have dramatically ramped up their lobbying efforts in Washington. Facebook have always had a very strong presence there, Uber, Snap. But particularly with Twitter, Twitter is one we should really watch. They have been sort of the leanest prepared. They have been really struggling to get up to speed as they deal with this. It's always been a very leanly staffed operation, and yet it might be the platform that actually had the most import in terms of when we look at the election. So I'm really watching Twitter in terms of how they respond and how they get ahead of this. It's crucial to their brand, given in terms of what economic circumstances they're in as well.